The floorboards of the courthouse groaned like old bones beneath the boots of the man who stood alone. Light filtered through warped glass windows, slanting across his face in fractured gold, making the dust shimmer like snow falling sideways. He didn't shift, didn't speak. Just stood there, hat clutched in calloused hands, jaw gritted against the weight of being seen with no one beside him. The judge, a stern old figure whose spectacles pinched the bridge of his nose, cleared his throat again. Still, the man said nothing. Behind him, the gallery was near empty. Only a few townsfolk lingered. Bankers, a ranch rival or two, a woman with gray lace gloves whispering into the ear of her sister. All of them watching, but none watching kindly. He was once the kind of man others listened to when he entered a room. Back straight, voice low but sure. But time and grief had worn him like a river wearing down a stone. His boots were scuffed. His coat didn't fit anymore, too wide in the shoulders, too long in the sleeves. As if it remembered a man stronger than the one still inside it. The judge's voice finally landed. You owe back taxes. The land set for seizure come first frost if payment isn't made. Still, the man didn't argue. What was there to say? He'd buried his wife 2 winters back, beneath a cottonwood that no longer bloomed. The cattle dwindled. The soil hardened. And the bank came like a slow snake, polite but fanged. Do you have anyone here to speak for you? The courtroom hushed. The man turned slightly, as if searching the rows for someone who might have followed. But there was no one. Just a silence so dense it pressed against the skin. No, Your Honor. It came out dry as sand. 1 sentence in 10 minutes. 1 lifeline already fraying. The judge leaned back. Then we move forward. The doors burst open. A gust of wind came in first, followed by a girl no one knew. Young, 20, maybe. Poor, clearly. Her dress was faded gingham, apron threadbare, the laces of her boots trailing like roots across the wood floor. But her steps didn't falter. She walked like she had right. The whispers started. She walked straight down the aisle between pews, chin high, shoulders square. When she reached the front, she did not glance at the man beside her. She turned to the judge and said, in a voice clear as a spring thaw, "He's my husband." The gallery gasped. Somewhere in the back, a chair scraped harshly across the floor. The judge raised his brows without moving anything else on his face. The man beside her blinked once. The girl didn't blink at all. The judge said nothing for a long moment, studying her as if trying to see through time itself. "This true?" he finally asked the man. The widower's voice came slow. "I've never laid eyes on her." The girl turned slightly then, not in alarm, but calm as ever. She looked at him for the first time, and her gaze was steady. "You have now," she said. The courtroom rumbled with tension. Someone murmured, "Crazy," another said, "Con artist," but the judge struck his gavel once, not to silence the room, but to still its pulse. "Step into chambers. Both of you." The girl nodded. The man hesitated, but then he followed. Inside, the room was warmer, books stacked too high, old tea stains on the desk. The judge sat, folding his hands. "I don't take kindly to theatrics," he said. "It wasn't theater," the girl replied. "It was mercy." The judge looked to the man. "You know anything about this?" He shook his head. His voice had quiet resignation. "No, sir. Not a thing." "You claim to be his wife," the judge said, turning to the girl. "You've got no papers. No witness. Why?" She looked at her feet for just a breath, then met his eyes again. "Because he was standing there all alone. And it didn't sit right in my heart to let that go unanswered." The judge leaned back, perhaps expecting something clever. But she said no more. Just stood there like a storm that refused to pass. Outside, the gavel never came again. The hearing was paused, delayed on account of the confusion. The judge said he'd decide what to do with the land after further consideration. They walked out together. She walked ahead, as if she didn't expect him to follow. But he did. Not because he believed her or trusted her, but because something in the courtroom had cracked, and the air outside felt easier to breathe. They stood on the courthouse steps, townsfolk pretending not to stare. He spoke first. Why? She didn't look at him. Just kept her eyes on the street. Because no one should have to stand alone. A wagon clattered by. Somewhere a bell rang. And what now? He asked. I suppose that depends on whether you'd rather call me a liar or a wife. He studied her. She didn't wear shame like most liars did. She didn't tremble like someone hoping to get away with something. Her face was too still, her voice too soft. And something in his chest, which had been cold for far too long, stirred. He swallowed, looked up at the sun, then back to her. You got a place to sleep tonight? She turned to him then. Her answer was simple. I do now. He nodded. They walked toward the horse tethered near the well, side by side, not saying much. Not needing to. The town watched them go, trying to guess what kind of trick this was. Some muttered bets. Others whispered scandal. But out on the road, once the dust swallowed the buildings, there was only the wind and the silence between them. A silence that didn't feel empty, just open. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't explain. And maybe neither one of them had anything left to lose. But somehow, walking into the unknown together felt less like surrender, and more like the start of something the world wouldn't understand. Not yet. But maybe someday. And that was enough for now. The ride back was near wordless. The girl sat side saddle on his mule, holding the reins loose but steady. Her skirt had a tear above the knee, stitched once, then again in a different thread. She didn't fidget, didn't ask questions. She just looked out past the wheatgrass, watching where the land folded like soft quilts beneath a faded sky. The widower rode behind, silent as stone. His ranch lay east of town, 3 miles past the old cottonwood grove, down a dirt road that narrowed to little more than memory. The gate still leaned crooked from last winter's storm. The fence had missing rails. And the porch, sloped, splintered, and sun-bleached, waited like a tired elder too proud to ask for repair. 2 chairs sat on that porch. One bore his shape, the other his wife's. He hadn't sat in hers since she died. The girl climbed down without needing help. She dusted her skirt with one hand, her chin lifting slightly as she studied the ranch. Her gaze moved over the roof, the half-collapsed chicken coop, the dry patch where a garden used to grow. She didn't sigh, didn't smile either, just nodded. This'll do. He didn't know whether she meant for a night or a lifetime. So he said nothing. Inside, the place smelled of ash and pine and something older. Grief, perhaps, though no man would say it plain. The table was set for one. The hearth hadn't been lit in weeks. A single plate lay on the counter, still dusted in breadcrumbs. I'll sweep, she said, already untying her bonnet. You don't have to, he replied. I know. She swept. Quietly. Thoroughly. As though it were her home and always had been. He watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure whether to offer a blanket or ask her to leave. That night, she slept on the cot in the corner. He gave her his old quilt, the one with the stitching his wife had done when the nights still held warmth. He sat outside for a long time after she'd fallen asleep, rocking slowly in his chair, the wind whispering across the plains like it carried secrets too ancient to speak aloud. The next morning, she made cornbread. He didn't have much left, just cornmeal, a bit of flour, salt, but she made it stretch. The smell woke him. He walked into the kitchen to find her humming something soft and unfamiliar. She placed a slice on his plate and sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the window rather than his face. They didn't speak while eating. After breakfast, she hung clothes to dry on the line, even though it hadn't rained. She mended a rip in one of his shirts. She dragged a broken crate outside and sat on it while peeling potatoes with a knife that had gone dull long ago. Every movement she made was like a prayer, intentional, quiet, unwavering. That afternoon, he asked her what her name was. She gave it. He repeated it once, then nodded. It fit her. Strong, simple, with a rhythm that suited silence. The second night, they ate stew in the dark. No candles. Just moonlight pooling on the floorboards like silver water. She ate slowly. He drank from a chipped tin cup. Outside, coyotes howled in the far distance. I lied, she said suddenly. He looked up. I ain't your wife. You know that. He said nothing. But if I hadn't said it, they'd have taken your land. Or tried to. Still, he said nothing. She waited, then stood. If you want me gone, sit. The word came firm, final. She sat. And nothing more was spoken. Days folded over each other like the pages of a worn diary. They fell into a rhythm without meaning to. She fixed the porch rail. He chopped wood. She taught herself how to bake with half rations. He cleaned out the barn for the first time in months. He didn't touch her. Didn't ask where she came from, or who'd broken her before the courthouse. And she didn't ask about the picture frame still hanging in the bedroom, the one with the woman whose eyes looked like his on the loneliest days. It wasn't until the 7th day that something shifted. She found him out near the well, crouched low, hand pressed against the side of his ribs. When she approached, he stiffened. But she saw the blood anyway, dark and dry where it soaked his shirt. A split from chopping too hard, or maybe from the coughing he'd tried to hide. She said nothing, just reached for his arm and helped him stand. He didn't thank her. That night, she brought water in a clay bowl and dabbed the blood with a cloth. Her hands were gentle. He watched her quietly. You ain't afraid of blood? He asked. I've seen worse. From who? She wrung the cloth and looked away. Doesn't matter. I left. He didn't press. But something in him stirred. The next morning, he left a pair of boots by her cot, boots that had once belonged to his wife. Not new, but cared for. Oiled. Worn smooth at the toe. She said nothing, just slipped them on. They fit. At the trading post the following week, folks stared. Whispered. A banker tipped his hat, then muttered something about charity under his breath. The girl held her head high. She walked beside the widower, not behind. Inside, she handed over the list she'd written. Flour. Soap. Sewing needles. She counted each coin carefully. When the clerk asked if she was his daughter, the man paused. No, he said slowly. She's my wife. The room went quiet. Outside, on the way home, she didn't speak. Neither did he. But their silence felt different now, less like distance, more like shelter. 2 days later, a letter arrived. The seamstress she once worked for, the one she ran from, had written, accusing her of theft, of deception, threatening to bring charges. Said she'd seen her picture in town with a man and knew she'd lied in court. She burned the letter behind the barn, her hands steady. But that night, he found her curled beneath the porch steps, knees drawn to her chest, face hidden. I shouldn't ve stayed, she whispered. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her in the dirt. For a long time, they watched the wind stir through the weeds. Then he said almost softly, I don't care what she wrote. She lifted her face, eyes wet, chin trembling. I do. He nodded. That's 'cause you still think it matters who we were. She said nothing, but the stillness between them was no longer hollow. That night, she sat in the second chair on the porch. It was the first time it had been used in 2 years. He poured 2 cups of coffee, hands slightly shaking from the cold. He handed her one. She cradled it, then looked out over the fields. Do you miss her? He didn't pretend not to know who she meant. Every day. She nodded. Doesn't mean you don't belong here, he added. The stars bloomed overhead like lanterns. I ain't never belonged anywhere, she said. He looked at her then, not the dress or the boots or the history she carried like invisible bruises, but her. Well, he said, voice low, maybe we start there. A soft wind brushed against the porch. The night pressed in, not heavy, but warm. Her hand reached toward the splintered railing, fingers tracing something. A carved name. Not hers. She didn't flinch. Instead, She took a pocket knife from her apron and carved hers beside it. Smaller, lighter, but there. He didn't stop her. And when she finished, he reached across the space between their chairs and placed his hand over hers, not as claim, but as promise. The stars didn't flicker. They just held. The season turned slow, as though time itself had chosen to rest a while on their porch. Each morning the frost came down softer, like lace unraveling across the fields. The land, stubborn and dry for months, started to ease. And though neither said it out loud, something was shifting between them too, like snow melting under sun they hadn't dared believe in. She rose early now, before the rooster's cry, pulled water from the well in silence, combed her hair into a braid, tied it with twine. He began fixing things that had long since been left to rot: the fence, the barn roof, the front step that used to tilt just slightly left. They worked in parallel, wordless yet never apart. The townsfolk were still watching. That hadn't changed. At the mercantile, the schoolteacher gave the girl a lingering glance as she folded a bolt of muslin. Not cruel. Not kind, either. The kind of look reserved for things one didn't quite understand. A whisper passed between a pair of women near the flour sacks. He caught it. So did she. He handed her the coins without a word and waited by the door. On the ride home, she didn't speak until they reached the rise overlooking the pasture. I heard what they said. He didn't pretend otherwise. You ain't bothered? She asked. I stopped living for their approval the day they didn't show up at my wife's funeral. She blinked slowly. I reckon that's a kind of freedom. That's the only kind worth having. That night, after supper, she lingered on the porch. He joined her without being asked. A lantern glowed between them, flame flickering in the still air. They think I'm after your land, she said. He looked out into the dark. I ain't got land worth stealing. She folded her hands in her lap, thumb rubbing the base of her finger as if a ring once lived there. They say you took me in out of desperation. I did, he said. Her head turned. But they don't understand the kind. The lantern hissed faintly. She smiled then, not a full smile, not the kind that reached every corner, but enough to soften her cheeks. I used to dream of having my own table, she whispered. Just one where no one yelled. No one slapped my hand away. He didn't answer, just refilled her coffee. In early spring, the sheriff came riding up with his hat in hand. Not angry, but not casual either. He dismounted slow, dust trailing his boots. Need to talk, he said. The girl stepped inside, sensing the tone. The sheriff leaned on the post. There's been noise. Always is. This one's louder. That woman, your girl's old employer, she's stirring up papers. Claims she's coming to press charges. False identity. Says your wife here lied in court to interfere with legal process. He exhaled hard through his nose, then added, could mean jail time if a judge sees it that way. The man didn't blink. She didn't lie to steal. She lied to save. Makes no difference in town law. The sheriff tipped his hat back on his head. But it might make a difference in how you defend her, if you intend to. I do. Then you best be ready. He nodded once. That evening, he told her. Her hands stilled mid-stitch. The fabric in her lap trembled before her fingers went still. So I go to jail. You're not going anywhere. Her lips parted. She stared at him. You can't stop her. No, he said. But I can stand between you and her. Her shoulders folded forward, and something in her broke just slightly. I ain't worth fighting for. He leaned forward, voice steady as a sunrise. Don't say that again. She looked at him, eyes wide, as if hearing something no one had ever told her before. The next day, he rode into town alone. Met with the same judge from before. Asked what could be done. She lied, yes, the judge said. But lies spoken to preserve life, those ain't always the kind that deserve punishment. Then what do you need? Proof. Proof that the marriage ain't pretend. The man stared hard. And if I say she's my wife? I'll need it signed. Official. He left the courthouse with a paper in his coat. Back at the ranch, he handed it to her without explanation. She opened it. Read. Looked up. You want to lie again? I want to tell the truth this time. But we're not. We could be. She blinked. You want that? His voice dropped to a hush. I want you to feel safe calling this place home. Whether it's legal or not, you already live in every corner of it. Her throat bobbed. I don't got a dress. Or a church. You got a porch. And a man who'd stand still for you no matter how long it takes. They didn't sign it that day. They waited. Let time hold them like a tender hand cupped around a flame. And as the moon grew full again, she began to leave things out in the open, a ribbon on the table, a book on the chair. Her presence began to feel like it belonged not beside his life, but within it. He carved a new chair from cedar, placed it beside the old two. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the table, she found the signed paper waiting by her coffee cup, her name in neat, careful strokes beside his. She ran her fingers over it, then walked out back, stood near the well, and cried where no one could see. Later that week, a letter arrived from town. A formal inquiry. A warning. The threat was still there. She held it in shaking hands and brought it to him. He read it in silence, then reached into the drawer, took out the signed paper, and walked straight to the postman himself. Let the world know. They were married now. When the sun fell that evening, she stepped onto the porch, wrapped in the coat he'd bought her last season. He stood beside her, watching the light fade over the hills. They'll still talk, she said. I know. They'll still say it was all pretend. They can say what they like. And you'll still call me wife? He turned to her, eyes soft as rain. Long as breath's in me. She didn't answer with words. Just reached for his hand, held it lightly, like something sacred. And in the lantern's glow, their shadows stretched long across the porch, side by side, reaching into the dark like branches that had finally found the sun. The light stayed longest that evening. The summons came wrapped in an official seal, its paper thick, creased by the hands of the sheriff who had ridden all the way to deliver it in person. He didn't dismount, just handed it to the man on the porch and gave a grim nod. No words. The letter said enough. The girl was behind the curtain when it arrived. She didn't need to read it to understand. Her fingers tightened around the windowsill as she watched the sheriff ride off into the dust, leaving behind something heavier than hoofprints. Back inside, the man unfolded the letter slow. The courthouse in town had accepted the claim. The girl was to present herself for questioning within 5 days. A woman from her past, the seamstress, had filed charges: perjury, impersonation, false claim of marriage. And the law, slow and hollow-hearted as it was, listened louder to those who had money behind their accusations. The girl stood quiet by the hearth, waiting. He didn't look at her when he spoke. We ride in the morning. She said nothing, just turned back to the pot she was stirring, as if the warmth of stew might somehow anchor her in a world that had always tried to cut her loose. That night, sleep didn't find either of them. She lay on the cot, eyes open to the beams above. He sat outside in the rocking chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other around the cup he never drank from. The moon passed over them both, indifferent and full. At dawn, they packed light. She wore her plainest dress. He cleaned his boots for the first time in months. He didn't speak until they reached the edge of town. If it comes to it, he said, I'll stand between you and the gallows. She turned, eyes stinging. No one's handgin me. Then let them try me. Her voice broke then, soft and sharp. You can't fix me with sacrifice. No, he said, but I can remind the world what mercy looks like. The courthouse was fuller this time. Not packed, but no longer sparse. Word had spread, like wildfire in dry brush. Some came for gossip, others for justice, though few understood what either really meant. The seamstress was already there, draped in dark green velvet, her eyes narrowed like knives honed for years. The girl's feet barely touched the ground as she walked. But her spine was straight, and her chin didn't bow. They were called forward. The judge was the same, a man aged more by burden than time. He adjusted his spectacles, gaze passing between the girl and the man beside her. I've reviewed the statements. I know what's been said. What's left is for each of you to answer a question clearly. Are you married by bond or by convenience? The girl swallowed. She looked at the man, then back to the judge. Her voice came steady. We were strangers once. That part's true. I lied to that courtroom so a man wouldn't fall alone. But I stayed because I found something in him that wasn't a lie. The judge nodded once, then turned. And you? The man met the judge's eyes. I didn't ask for her. But she came, and stood when no one else did. She saw what was left of me and didn't flinch. I call that love, or close enough. Murmurs moved like wind through the benches. The seamstress stood abruptly. This is a sham. She forged herself into a man's life like a parasite. That girl ran from debt, from duty, from her name. She's no wife, she's a fraud. The girl didn't flinch, but her eyes glistened. The judge raised his hand for quiet. No one denies she came in through a side door. The question is whether she stayed as a thief or as something else. He reached into the drawer of his desk, pulling out a parchment. This is a marriage license, already signed. If you wish to make it true in the eyes of this court, sign again now, in front of witnesses. That ends this matter. Refuse, and I'll have no choice but to move forward with charges. Silence filled the room. Thick. Waiting. The girl looked down at her hands, then up at him. He nodded once. She stepped forward first. Her name, carefully written, bloomed on the paper like something grown from soil that had waited too long for sun. Then his name beside hers, ink pressed deep, confident. The judge read the names aloud, one by one. I declare this union lawful. This court sees no crime here, only a beginning made from mercy. The seamstress hissed through clenched teeth. She'll slip again. You'll see. The girl turned to her. If I do, it won't be into your hands. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the hush that followed felt less like judgment, and more like reverence. Outside, the street looked different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. He walked beside her, hand resting just behind her back, steady but not possessive. They didn't return home right away. Instead, they rode out past the cottonwood grove, to the edge of the prairie where the sun dipped slow. There was no wind. No bird song, just breath and earth and sky. She turned to him. Why didn't you ask for more? For a wedding dress, or a preacher's blessing, or certainty? He studied her face, the lines sorrow had carved, the fire that still refused to go out. Because I'd rather have truth in plain cloth than lies in lace. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small circle of twine, frayed, simple, tied at the ends. I made this, she said. Didn't know if it'd matter. He held out his hand. She slid it onto his finger. It fit. I reckon that counts, he murmured. No one else ever asked me if I was worthy, she said. You were, he replied. Even when I wasn't. The wind picked up slightly then, brushing the grass in waves. The sky stretched above them, impossibly wide. When they returned to the ranch, the porch held 2 chairs and now a table between them, carved from pine, rough but strong. On it sat 2 cups, already poured. He watched her take her seat. Watched how her body eased, how the weight slid from her shoulders like snow melting off a roof. Are you mine now? He asked, not possessive but prayerful. She smiled. I always was. You just hadn't named it yet. He nodded, reached for her hand. And beneath the cotton-stained twilight, he whispered her name like it was something ancient and holy. No preacher. No choir. Just 2 broken things finding shape beside one another. The land would still be hard. The town would still talk. But they had chosen each other, not for what was easy, but for what was true. And that, sometimes, was the only ring that mattered. So to you, listening at the edge of this firelit story, if ever you feel the world turning cold, I hope someone walks in, uninvited, and says I'll stand with you before you fall. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive in lace and lilies. Sometimes it arrives in dust and silence. And stays. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.